Hello everyone, Dr. Q here. Today I'd like to talk a little bit about extra credits, Jim Sterling, loot boxes, and the cost of making AAA games. Last week, the YouTube channel Extra Credits put out a video engaging in apologetics, essentially trying to explain why it's okay for video games to include loot boxes and other forms of monetization that Jim Sterling has oftentimes called predatory and anti-consumerist. The rationale of the Extra Credits crew was that because there has been inflation and video game costs have not kept up to par with monetary inflation, then video game developers, studios, and publishers should find other ways in order to make back the money that they spent in creating these games. They argued that if the price of video games had kept pace with inflation, they would cost anywhere around $90 to $100, according to their gut feeling, which honestly is my gut feeling as well, and based on the data that they provided, the number seems somewhat accurate. However, the issue addressed in that original video was not that of inflation by itself, but rather the question of whether loot boxes, whether cosmetic or otherwise, and other monetization mechanics that have been broadly implemented in the mobile game space should be likewise implemented in more traditional gaming spaces like that of console and PC gaming. Now, thank God that Jim Sterling made a video refuting a lot of the points made by Extra Credit. Sterling talked about how when they're speaking to the shareholders, companies give them information that's not consistent with the type of information that they give the gaming audience. He cited several examples, including Ubisoft and EA, who, when speaking to their shareholders, will say that they don't need loot boxes to make a living. But when they speak to magazine outlets, Polygon, Kotaku, IGN, they'll state that they need to implement these loot box type of monetization mechanics in order for the studio to make a profit. If you'd like to see both of these videos, I've linked them down below. Now, both of these videos predictably received a huge backlash. And earlier today, the Extra Credit staff put up a video doubling down on their position and defending the need for these kinds of predatory monetization techniques. And that video was seriously disingenuous. In this follow-up, they spent roughly 9 minutes explaining why it costs so much to make video games. They talk about the cost of paying developers, the cost of paying for hardware, paying for facilities, paying voice actors, hiring technical staff, outsourcing translations for the video game, and licensing the game engines that will run the video game, because yes, it's true, for you to license a game engine in order to make a video game will be a cheaper endeavor than for you to craft your own game engine from scratch. The Extra Credit staff estimated, correctly so, that the standard cost of producing a AAA video game with a studio of over 200 game developers, not including voice actors and other technical staff or janitors and so on, would be around $100 million. Now, there are counter-arguments that have been made to this price tag, in which some have argued games with a AAA quality could cost substantially less than these AAA endeavors mentioned in the video, like Call of Duty and so on. And while speaking about theoretical possibilities about how some studio could cut costs here or there is not necessarily the best argument to be made, we don't have to make that argument. There are actual examples right now of AAA quality games that have cost far less than $10 million to create. The most recent example of this is Hellblade. Now, Hellblade is a video game developed by Ninja Theory, the game studio responsible for Enslaved, Heavenly Sword, DMC, and Disney Infinity. And for creating Hellblade, the studio hired 12 to 15 individuals. 12 to 15. That is a long shot from the 200 to 500 developers that Extra Credits argues every AAA game needs. Now, I haven't found the exact number for Hellblade's cost, but if we go with the sales target, according to several outlets, Ninja Theory was aiming to sell anywhere between 200 to 300,000 copies of the game, and that would have allowed them to recoup all the money invested in the creation of this title. Now, if we take the higher end of this range, multiply that by the cost of unit of $30, this means that Hellblade cost a whopping $9 million to make. That is nowhere near the $100 million suggested by Extra Credits and its staff. Oh, and if we assume the smaller numbers, the game actually costs closer to $6 million to make. And how does Extra Credits deal with this case study? Well, they just dismiss it in one line. Oh, I'm glad that Hellblade finally made its shoestring budget back. There's a lot we could learn there. Yes, that's the point. There is a lot we could learn there. It's not a case study in which you can simply dismiss it offhandedly, throw it by the wayside, and say, oh, that doesn't count because that's not how AAA games are made. It's the contrary. Look at that case and see how it worked. See how it was developed. See the moves that the studio made and emulate them. But that's not really my gripe with the video. My gripe with the video, with the rebuttal video, and the reason why I find it so disingenuous isn't the examples that they use when talking about the kind of AAA games that we want. They say that we want more Witcher 3s and Horizons and Breath of the Wilds and Grand Theft Autos and Red Deads. And I couldn't agree more. There's no disagreement in that. But here's the thing, Extra Credits. Even though GTA 5 cost around $265 million to make, and Red Dead cost around $100 million to make, just like Breath of the Wild, and even though The Witcher cost $81 million to make, none of these games included the kind of predatory mechanics that gamers rile against when they speak out against Destiny 2, when they speak out against Battlefront 2, or when they say that Shadow of War is a terrible game because of the way that it forces a player to pay real money in exchange for loot boxes so that they can skip the end game grind. Games that have multiple editions or day one DLC or super extra exclusive gold editions. These are the kinds of practices that gamers rally against. And so when you say, well, look at Witcher 3, look at Horizon, they cost so much, therefore we need loot. But these games didn't have loot boxes. These games didn't have tiered releases. You are conflating two things that are very different. And that is a fallacious argument. Oh, and in case you're wondering, Horizon Zero Dawn, another AAA complete game with no predatory monetization schemes, cost only $47 million to make. Let that sink in.